Welcome to the B2B Roundtable. This is episode 13. I'm your host, Brian Carroll, and today's guest is John Miller, who is the CEO and co-founder of Engagio, and really excited to have John with us today. Well, John, welcome, and why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to start Engagio?
Sure, great. And excited to be here and have a chance to hang out with you again. It's been a while since we talked.
It has.
So, my background, I've been in marketing technology almost my entire career. My undergraduate degree is actually in physics. And when I was coming out of college, I ended up doing a lot of work with companies that were trying to take advantage of all the customer data they had to make decisions. Because I came to marketing with that quantitative and analytical background, that led me into a series of marketing technology companies that were basically all about really trying to use all that data to drive better customer decisions and one-to-one interactions. Very much inspired by the Don Peppers and Martha Rogers book, The One-to-One Future. So I worked with a company called Exchange. Then I was an early employee at a company called Epiphany, which was probably the leading marketing technology of the mid-90s. After we sold Epiphany, I co-founded Marketo along with Phil Fernandez. I think that's arguably, or maybe not even arguably, the leading marketing technology of the last 10 years or so. Recently sold to Adobe for just under $5 billion. So I had this long career in marketing technology, but I saw, one of the trends that I think is always true is, marketing is changing all the time. Not as well as the underlying technologies are changing all the time.
Yes.
And I just felt about 4 years ago that Marketo wasn't, frankly, moving fast enough, I thought, to kind of keep up with all the new trends and changes in how marketing was done. So I was inspired to start a new company that would, really be seeking to build out the next generation marketing product, that could really to take advantage of all these new trends. One of those big trends is what's now been known as account-based marketing. And so that's where I really decided to start to focus is, to have Engagio be a platform for account-based marketing.
Well, there's a lot of definitions out there about account-based marketing, and I've talked with CMOs and VPs, and they see account-based marketing as just good marketing. But I'd love to ask you, you just had this new book come out, the Clear, Complete Guide to Account-Based Marketing, and you're on your second edition. And so how would you define it?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just say, really excited about the book. It is the second edition. I wrote the first one about 3 years ago, and I think obviously I've learned a ton more about ABM in the last 3 years. I'll start with a colloquial definition of ABM, then I'll give you my formal one.
Sure.
I think the colloquial one I like to use really is a comparison back to the kind of marketing that we did with Marketo. And that is the marketing that I like to describe as fishing with nets. When you're fishing with nets, you run your campaigns and you don't care which specific fish you catch. You just care, did I catch enough? Mm-hmm. That you can then do lead nurturing and lead scoring to kind of run it through the system. But when you're going after bigger or more strategic accounts, or maybe because you're going after your existing customers for expansion, or you're in a narrow industry, whatever, anytime you have a specific list of named accounts, you don't want to wait around for those big fish to swim into your net. You're going to find ways to reach out to them proactively. It's much more like fishing with a spear. And so, to me, that's the simple definition of account-based marketing. It's spear fishing as opposed to net fishing. My formal definition is that account-based marketing is a go-to-market strategy that will coordinate personalized marketing and sales efforts to land and expand at target accounts. Can I just explain what some of those words mean? Or why?
Yeah, if you could break that out, that would be great.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm very precisely calling it a strategy. ABM is a way of running your go-to-market, and how your sales and marketing and customer success teams work. It's not a campaign or a tactic. So you really do need to kind of say, we use ABM as our go-to-market strategy, or at least one of our go-to-market strategies. Second, ABM is really all about being personalized. Mm-hmm. There's so much noise in the market today. if you're spearfishing and you're trying to reach out to the right people, the right companies, somehow you've got to break through all that noise. And the best way to do that is with relevance, resonance, and empathy, which I know we'll talk about.
Yes.
ABM is actually a misnomer because we're saying it's account-based marketing, but right there in my definition, I'm talking about marketing and sales. And I think we should talk about that a little bit more later. ABM is about landing and expanding, and I think that especially today, so many companies make revenue, earn the revenue through subscription models and recurring revenue models, that just focusing on that new business, which is what the net fishing is all about, is really limited myopic focus. And ABM expands or changes the marketer's mindset to really focus on the entire revenue journey, landing, creating new pipeline, accelerating existing deals, expanding and retaining existing relationships. ABM plays across all that. So that's why I chose that definition.
And I appreciate what you're talking about, just the overarching trend. CEOs are focused on lifetime value, LTV, CAC, customer acquisition cost. And so, ABM is providing answers to that. And there still is so much confusion out there. And you say ABM isn't just about marketing. How do you mean? How is it really different from demand generation? Because I still think people out there, even though we've just talked about the definitions, still are getting confused.
Yeah, well, so, I always thought it was ironic that we called, the category Marketo played in, we called that marketing automation. And people thought marketing automation means that you have less humans doing, or fewer humans doing less work. And the reality is it's the exact opposite, right? When you buy a tool like Marketo or any marketing automation platform, it requires work. People have to do stuff. So in many ways, marketing automation is a misnomer in the same way that ABM is a misnomer, because ABM is not just about marketing. If you're focused on the entire revenue journey, creating a new pipeline, accelerating existing deals, expanding and retaining relationships, that can't just be marketing. It has to be an orchestrated business initiative, between the different functions. And frankly, if it's just marketing, it's not a strategy, it's a campaign. We actually like talking sometimes at Engagio, and a lot of our customers have their strategies that they're not called ABM. They actually call it something more like account-based everything, or the account first initiative, or just something as simple as account-based sales and marketing. I've seen all of those at play, and I think it really is the right way to think about it, because otherwise, as I said, it's just a campaign.
I think that's a huge distinction, especially as people are thinking towards the future. And I liked in your book, as I was reading it, you have a quote: salespeople never talk about how many leads they closed. They talk about how many accounts they closed. And do you find that marketers see this differently, and why?
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is my fault, and a little bit your fault, because you helped invent lead nurturing as well. But we taught marketers to talk about leads.
Right.
I mean, that was literally, we called it lead nurturing and so on.
Right.
And the technologies that we use, like Marketo, for example, they were built to be really lead-based systems. You can't even log into Marketo and look at an account, for example. And so we created this world where marketers talked about leads and salespeople talked about accounts, which almost by definition meant they were literally not on the same page. And that's not the only reason marketing and sales have trouble getting along, but it certainly didn't help. And I think a big part of ABM, really put simply, is just marketers, frankly, adopting the language that salespeople use. And just, again, being on the same page.
Yeah, and I think salespeople have practiced in some ways the very things that you're talking about in your book. They may have called it strategic account selling, major account selling, target account selling, but they did focus on these accounts. And as you talked about, now marketers are coming alongside salespeople and working on these accounts together. So we're going to talk about some process steps, but I wanted to step back to something you said earlier, was just like, there's so much noise out there, and we have more channels, more content, more technology to reach customers than ever before, but connecting with them has never been harder. And I am, of course, a big proponent and fan of empathy. And how do you see, building empathy for our customers to bridge that gap of connection and trust and account-based marketing fitting together?
Yeah, I mean, in ABM, once you've identified the accounts you want to go after and the people at those accounts you want to reach, as I said, you've got to kind of find a way to reach out to them and engage them. Literally, it's such a crowded, noisy market, and people love to, just ignore unwanted marketing and unwanted messaging. I think at the core, if you want to cut through the noise, you have to find a way to really delight your prospects, educate them, add value to them. Empathy, I think empathy and relevance, are really just two sides of a coin.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you empathize with your prospects, the people you're trying to reach, it means you understand their pains, right? And if you understand their pains, you're going to be in a much better position to actually teach them something, to their specific economic motivators, their specific pains. And that is how we stand out. It's just like, I think it's just very much like the challenger sale.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, so popular on the sales side of the equation. That's what the best salespeople do, is they teach and they tailor, and they do that by having empathy with their customer. So very much these things go hand in hand. I'm curious if you have additional thoughts on that, because you're the empathy expert.
I certainly do. And for our listeners, we actually had Brent Adamson, who is a co-author of the Challenger Sale and Challenger Customer. So we actually got Brent's thoughts about this, and I'll share my perspective. At a deeper level, you talked about the pains, and it's really just understanding we rationalize our decisions, but what neuroscientists have shown is all of our decisions are based in emotion. And so we have to think about when they're making a purchase where it's a complex sale, and ABM is oriented to that, multiple people, that what causes us to change is that we see something in it for us. And what causes us to stay stuck, it's like trying to climb a mountain. If I want to climb and I got to take other people with me, some of them don't want to go. Or I'm concerned about how do they feel about doing this? How will my team see me? I'm going to be concerned about, is this going to add 10 extra hours to my week and I'm already maxed out? So there's this personal stuff that's happening inside your customer, because we're all customers. We all make decisions emotionally. And what we need to realize is, just because it's B2B, that in fact we think it's less emotional, but the reality is the stakes are higher. It's more emotional. So that's the thing that I find is we got to tune in to every stage of the journey, what's happening.
That's a great point. I think I've always talked about, very much similar kind of as you're talking about. The only thing I also add is I think the emotions in B2B, tend to be more about avoiding negative emotions, whereas B2C might be about kind of seeking aspirational emotion, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why is because in B2B there's such a disconnect between the if you make a good purchase, your company is a little bit better off. You make a bad purchase, you can lose your job.
Yeah, and often people start journeys by, hey, I'm learning about, and I feel inspired and hopeful we could actually do something. And pretty quickly after that, it goes to despair, like, oh my gosh, is this even worth it? I want to try to get this into our company. It's so hard, and is it, for that person, they're really saying, do I want to do this? Is it really going to be worth it? And as you talked about the pain, just changing is painful. And so there's so much there. And I loved how you laid out these 7 ABM process steps. And we probably don't have time to go through all of them, but I was just going to ask, where do you see marketers getting stuck or need to put more attention in those 7 ABM process steps?
Sure. So, just for the listeners, I'll exec summary the 7 steps down in simple, which is, it's just really about who, what, and where, and then measurement. Which accounts, who do you want to go after? Which accounts, which people? What are you going to say to those accounts? That's going to actually, be empathetic and relevant. And then the where is, how do you actually get that message in front of them? What channels, and how do you orchestrate those interactions? And then the last piece is, measurement of the whole thing. So in terms of your question, where do people get stuck? It's really a maturity curve. Obviously, to start, you need to be able to pick your accounts. And, that is a process that has to go hand in hand with sales. And, the companies that are less mature can get wrapped up right around the axle right there, right? They just can't find a good process for how do marketing and sales actually collaborate around an account selection process. Once they're past that stage, I guess the best way to describe the sort of next area I see people get stuck is, frankly, they pick too many accounts to really be able to deliver the level of personalization and relevance that's truly required to be successful with ABM. I've seen people pick, they have 200 tier 1 accounts, right? 200 tier 1 accounts means that, you are not creating a bespoke, customized, interaction with deep account relevant research at every one of those 200 accounts. So, there's a set of interconnected challenges there, but it starts with recognizing that you've got to be able to break through the noise and stand out. That requires being more relevant.
Yes.
And you have to right size the number of accounts you pick to your actual abilities to be able to be relevant. And then the third challenge that the most mature companies run into is then scaling the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So great, you've identified some accounts and you've identified, things that you can do that are going to really help you stand out, and it worked great in your pilot. Now, how do you really, start to automate some of those steps to bring it to the next level and make sure that anytime a target account's doing something interesting, your sales team knows about it, you're following up appropriately, and it's really started to become a machine and not a whole series of kind of, one act heroics. I'd say those are probably the three, if you look across the who, what, where, the three areas where people kind of get into trouble.
That's really good, John. And as someone out there who's listening, who's thinking of beginning ABM, and this is part of their plan for 2019, or someone who's started it, do you have any tips or actionable advice that you would give to someone just like over coffee? And they said, hey, how do I do better?
Yeah, a couple tips. I think the first is that I see a lot of companies start their ABM journey with display advertising. And I think they do that because it's really easy. It's an easy button, right? You just have to spend some money, give them your account list, and hey, you get to say you're doing ABM. But I've also seen that lead to disillusionment with ABM quite frequently. Because the reality is, I don't care if you're doing account targeting or not, ads are ads.
Right.
I don't click on ads. I don't even notice ads. And I'm sure that's probably true of a lot of other executives. So my first tip is don't get seduced into thinking that you can really just start with ads. I think of ads as like a nice thing you layer on top of an existing program, but not your first step. That's my first piece of advice. I think my next piece of advice is that you really have to think about your technology infrastructure. Because this is, at Marketo, I started trying to do ABM with Marketo and Salesforce and the systems that I had. And it was hard. It was hard because of the fact that those are lead-based systems and the data in those systems don't roll up into your account. And I made my marketing operations team crazy just trying to kind of set up the processes so I could actually even measure whether or not we're even having an impact at the account level. So again, if you're looking to start, I really think it's worth thinking about what is your account foundation and how do you look at data at an account-based level. It's kind of obvious when you say it that way. Right?
Yes.
You can't be account-based if you can't look at your accounts. But I see a lot of people kind of missing that as a place to start.
It's very good. And as I was looking through the book, this is a book that you're offering for free to people for providing information. And I was just going to ask, you put a lot of effort and energy into it. It's very well done. What's your favorite chapter in your book and why?
My favorite chapter. So I think, Sophie's choice. I'm not going to pick one. I'm going to pick two here.
Okay, sounds good.
So I think, first is I'm the whole part 2 of the guide, which is all about the different styles of ABM and the concept of ABM entitlements is totally new in the second edition. And I think I like it a lot because when I go and talk to our customers about how they take their ABM program to the next level, this concept always comes up. The different styles and the entitlements. And it's related directly back to the problem I talked about earlier, which is people tend to have picked too many accounts and therefore aren't really able to deliver enough wood behind the arrow. So I think part 2 about the styles of ABM entitlements is one of my favorites. And then probably the other one I like a lot is this whole section on ABM metrics and measurement. Partly because I'm a quantitative measurement numbers guy, but it's really struck me how different the metrics in ABM are from the metrics, in traditional demand generation. In a nutshell, the metrics in traditional marketing really primarily focus on quantity. And back to the net fishing, it's all about how many leads did I generate? How many opportunities did I generate? How many people attended my webinar? How many people showed up at my event, and so on. And it totally misses out on the much more fundamental questions around quality. First of all, are these the right people from the right accounts? And because I don't really care, it's not about counting the people you reach, it's about reaching the people that count. And so are you measuring that? And then even furthermore, it's about understanding the depth and quality of the relationship. How engaged are these people with you? Most salespeople would rather have meaningful engagement from a decision maker at a target account than 100 random leads. And ABM metrics really kind of embrace that concept.
Totally. That's great. And is there anything you wanted to add? Otherwise, I was going to ask, what's the best way for readers and listeners to get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, we've been talking a lot about the book.
Yeah.
The main thing I want to add is go grab it. It's 175 pages. It's easy to read, lots of charts and tables, but packed of, I think, really actionable, useful information. And you can grab it on our website at engagio.com/guide. Just engagio.com/guide. And that's a great way, if you want to see a demo of Engagio, you can check a box there as well, and we'll get in touch with you. If you want to reach me personally, probably the best way is over Twitter, where I'm just at John Miller, JONMILLER.
Perfect. Well, John, thanks again for joining us and sharing your insights. And I'm really glad that we got to reconnect after so long.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.